Today on the Lowdown, a Down syndrome podcast, Sarah Mann gives us the lowdown on Down syndrome and physiotherapy. Over to you, Hannah Marla.
Thanks, Danielle. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the LowDOWN podcast. My name is Hina Mahmood. I'm an occupational therapist at the Down Syndrome Resource Foundation, and I'm joined by my fabulous co-host and colleague, Marla Folden, who is an SLP at the Down Syndrome Resource Foundation. Hi, Marla.
Hi, Hannah. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Oh, super well. I'm very excited for today.
I know. Let's get into the world of PT soon. So for today's episode, we will be diving into the world of physiotherapy, a crucial part of the allied health team for any individual with Down syndrome, as physiotherapists can really help with developing those foundational skills that impact their daily functioning. Dr. Sarah Mann, PT, is the owner and lead PT at Mann Method Physical Therapy in Arvada, Colorado. Her clinic supports PTs and OTs committed to providing the best clinical care to individuals with Down syndrome across the lifespan. Sarah has been working with adults with Down syndrome since 2004 and received her DPT degree. I'm assuming that's doctorate of physiotherapy at the University of Colorado in Anschutz Medical Campus. She is committed to supporting purposeful movement for individuals with Down syndrome through the blending of science and practice to help everyone with Down syndrome get moving and be awesome. Welcome to the Lowdown, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, we're super excited as well. Sarah, in the grand tradition of the Lowdown, we like to start off our episode with 5 secret questions so that our listeners can get to know you a little bit beyond just the PT, but see Sarah for who Sarah is. So are you game?
Always.
Awesome. Love that. Love that energy. A lot of people get very stressed when we say secret questions. I'm like, no, it's fun stuff. We promise.
I'm so excited.
Great. All right. So I'll start us off. Question number 1, what is your favorite thing to do by yourself?
Oh, favorite thing to do by myself. Well, I'm not by myself very often. I am a people person and I love to be around people like my family, my friends, all my friends with Down syndrome. I love being around people. So by myself, I guess I would say my most common thing that I do by myself is exercise. Okay. So I love to lift weights, and not everybody always wants to join me in with me on that one. But if they do, then I'll definitely take a friend.
Gotcha. Great. But you're okay doing it on your own too if needed.
I can do it on my own, but I really would prefer a friend joining me.
Yes. Awesome. Okay. Question number 2. What is something you're really good at cooking?
Something I'm really good. Okay. So I just discovered this awesome, super easy Instagram account for wholesome salads.
Oh,
and it's yes. So that's been our commitment this summer, is having more salads and vegetables in our dinners. Yeah. So I have been cooking up a mean salad.
Very nice. Excellent. Salads are quite fancy these days too. So they're not as easy as one would think. Sometimes it takes some time to construct it the way you want.
It's all about the presentation. Now the people are fancy and you put it in like little slices in a bowl and it looks so fancy. You're like, oh yes, see? I made a beautiful salad.
There you go. Yeah. I always think salads are a ton of work actually.
You guys are making me feel good about my cooking skill
I think they're a lot of work. I'm there for your salads. Absolutely. It sounds really good. I'll do the next one. What's your biggest pet peeve?
My biggest pet peeve is, you'll appreciate this as an SLP, chewing with your mouth open. It drives me crazy.
Yeah. It also drives Hannah crazy.
Yes. Oh, I never thought it would happen to me. My mom, it's also her pet peeve. And now I realize I think it's hereditary. And so
there you go.
Yep. The smacking when I hear my boys just eating Cheerios.
Oh yeah. I hear you. I'm so on your level with that one for sure.
Oh, that's funny.
That's why OT and PT and speech therapy are so purposeful all together, because it really helps that you can control your oral motor and your mouth muscles and
you have great Cheerios while you're at it.
It's my and have Cheerios. Yeah,
I have Cheerios.
It's my dream. My dream come true.
Oh, that's funny. Next question is, what activity helps you to relieve stress while you're at work?
So I am so lucky because I am a physical therapist or a physiotherapist, as we say outside of the US. And my job is to help people move and feel better moving. So I get to have a full day of exercise. We're doing squats, we're doing push-ups, we're working balance, and I get to encourage. So I get to do two things that are super stress relieving: move my body and encourage others. And that's what my real life job is. So it's a wonderful way to feel regulated and calm with decreased stress throughout my workday every day.
Love it.
I get that too. I think Hannah and I both feel the same way about our jobs then.
It's so
We're pretty
lucky.
lucky.
Yeah.
We're pretty lucky. Yeah. Last question is, if you had 25 hours in your day, what would you do with your extra time?
Ooh, that 25th hour. Oh, there's so many options. What would I do with the 25th hour? I think I would choose a dedicated activity for my family that we had to do. You know, that we would go rock climbing as a family, that we would go bike riding as a family every time for that 25th hour, that we would spend more time together, just enjoying
time.
Family time. Yep.
Yeah. I love it. Well,
I was going to say documentation, but that's really not very fun.
No, never documentation.
I feel like then I could get it done, but that's not fun.
Bonus charting hour.
No.
That's I don't even know if that would cut it, to be honest.
No.
Bonus
really
5
would
hours.
make a dent. We should probably go for a bike ride instead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. At least then when you have to do documentation, you're more efficient at it because you've gotten that extra 25th hour of
That's true.
fun stuff, right?
Yes, I'm focused.
Let's dive into physio, as we call it up here, physical therapy. Can you tell us a little bit about where you work and what your experience is with people with Down syndrome?
You bet. So I work in Arvada, Colorado, which is near Denver, Colorado. We're just closer to the mountains and a little bit less urban.
Okay.
And I have been working with adults with Down syndrome since 2004. So in 2004, I was a trainer in a gym because I love to exercise, just having a great time teaching people exercise, teaching exercise classes, and having a great time because it's a wonderful thing to share movement with people. And this wonderful woman who is so kind came up to me and she asked me if I wanted to be the trainer for her son. And I was, just 24. I'm like, sure, I know everything. What do you need? And she goes, great. He is 40 years old and has Down syndrome. And I was like, whoa, I don't know anything about people with Down syndrome. But I said, let's give it a go. And so in 2004, I started working with my friend Robbie, who has Down syndrome and is just a light in the world for everyone that he touched. And he and I both love weightlifting, the golden age of bodybuilding, all these things. And so we started just having a great time and doing basic, safe strength training and purposeful movement. And he was just teaching me what worked best for him. And we worked together. And I loved it. It was my most favorite part of my days. And then a few other families came up to me and they said, hi, I see you work with Robbie. Would you work with my son who has Down syndrome? And I said, oh, yes, I've worked with Robbie. I know one person with Down syndrome. I know everything about people with Down syndrome. I'm ready. And they said, great, this is my son. He's 16. He's nonverbal. He has a different experience about everything. It's like, oh, let's give it a try and see how it goes. And on it went. And it turned out that every person with Down syndrome that I worked with was very unique, with some underlying physiology that was common, but unique individuals. Mm-hmm. And it quickly turned into my favorite part of my workday and my life. So I decided that as a trainer, I didn't really know enough to serve my population how I wanted to. So I decided to go back to, I was looking, going, how do I become a better provider for adults with Down syndrome? What do they need? And so that's where I decided, they need someone who is really smart and educated in exercise. What is that? Oh, that's a physio. That's a physical therapist. I should do that. So I went back to school for physical therapy and got my doctorate in physical therapy here in Colorado with the goal of going into practice working with adults with Down syndrome. And I was lucky enough that while I was there, the first day of school, I went to my advisor and tracked down all the people who would like to work with people with Down syndrome, who then guided me to the mentors that I needed to find. And we were so lucky that at that time, the C Center for Down syndrome had just opened in Colorado at Children's Hospital, right next door to my university. So I quickly stalked Pat Winders, who is one of the best pediatric physical therapists in the world, and hunted her down and offered to do anything for her. I would carry her bags, walk with her, do whatever she needed. I would write her home programs, whatever she needed for as many years as it would take so that I could learn from her while I was in school. And Pat took me on as a mentee, and I did my final internship at the C Center for Down syndrome before I graduated, and then started working there after I graduated, working on their young adults adolescent program, which was awesome and amazing. And getting to work with the C Center team was phenomenal. But my heart has always been for working with adults with Down syndrome, and being settled in the Children's Hospital, it was a little bit limiting because that's for children. So after lots of discussion and encouragement, the C Center team gave me their blessing, and I went into private practice so that I could better serve our adults with Down syndrome in the physical therapy perspective. And as luck would have it, I've been able to build a team of other OTs and PTs committed to serving not only our adults with Down syndrome, but because we specialize in working with people with Down syndrome, we started getting calls from all of the organizations we work with saying, can you see our baby? Can you see our toddler? Can you see our school age kids? So we also have a pediatric specialist as well, so that they can provide the support from that perspective. Mm-hmm. So my skill set is really working with teenagers and adults with Down syndrome. It's my most favorite thing to do. And I'm lucky enough to have amazingly talented colleagues who have skills to work with babies, toddlers, and school age kids. Yep. Yeah. Because I just get very sweaty when I'm working with those babies, and I just want to cuddle. I get a little distracted.
I know. Fair enough.
So that's a long answer to where I am and how I started working with people with Down syndrome.
I mean, it's a good story. I love it. And yeah, I can totally resonate with the chasing down the specialist and offering to carry their stuff until they take you on. That's
rolling the baskets down the halls, whatever you need. I'll write it down. Let me write that home program down. I have it ready.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. Very relatable. Let's talk a little bit more about what physios do or what they think about when they see somebody with Down syndrome. So can you give us your brief overview of what are the sort of physical traits that are associated with Down syndrome that kind of affect everyday functioning?
All right. Well, I'm going to focus on teenagers and adults, if that's okay. If you have some more specific questions about littles, I can definitely jump in. But let me focus on teenagers and adults with Down syndrome and what physical therapists who work with them are looking for, or definitely should be paying attention to. Okay. So it's a couple different areas that are really important. First up, we always look at the underlying physiology of our people with Down syndrome. They have increased ligamentous laxity, so they're much bendier through every joint in their body. Ligaments are those structures that connect bone to bone. And in our people with Down syndrome, they're very, very flexible. And that's true for the babies, the toddlers, the kids, the teenagers, and our adults. So first off, that ligamentous laxity, that increased flexibility is something to always pay attention to because it plays a big role in how our people move and how their joints and systems are aging, especially through their adult years. Second, what I think is really important and what I really love is that we're sharing more from a research perspective is that there are some specific musculoskeletal conditions that are very common for individuals with Down syndrome related to the ligamentous laxity. So first off, and most important, is a high prevalence of flat feet. So people with Down syndrome, because of that ligamentous laxity, typically have very flat feet. This is going to affect how they walk, how they stand, how they move, their interest in walking, their interest in moving and exercising. It's a huge deal. So I love that physios are always paying attention first to foot posture.
So I'm not this is not my area. So why does having flat feet impact how much you want to be walking? What's the mechanism there?
So
Please
glad
explain.
you asked. Okay. So I want you to think in your mind of a friend with Down syndrome, someone that you know, and I want you to think about that. And even if right now you go ahead, I'm going to challenge you and your listeners to stand up. So I want you to stand up, listeners too. And I want you to think about your person with Down syndrome. And you're going to think, all right, there's a high likelihood their feet are turned out, their hips are turned out, their tummy's relaxed, and they're looking up at you, a little slouched. So that's their general standing posture. Then we think about the flat foot. So a flat foot means that the inside part of your foot, your arch, instead of being an arch where it's lifted up, it's flattened down so that the mid part of your foot is on the floor. So already you're thinking, wow, the mid part of my foot on the floor with my feet turned out, that doesn't sound like it feels good. What that does is it increases pressure on that mid part of the foot. It makes it harder to lift your feet up when you're walking. So our people have that decreased foot clearance. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you'll see our friends who may have what their parents call a shuffling gait, that they're kind of shuffling or walking slowly because it's hard to lift up that flat foot when the whole arch is resting on the floor. It's also putting increased pressure on the inside of your knee, which isn't going to feel good. And when our people also have an increased hip turnout or external rotation at their hips, it's putting a lot of stress at their hips and their back. So when we look from our foot all the way up to our hips, that because of that flat foot posture, that you're having decreased comfort, a slower speed, it's harder to move your foot, that makes a big difference in how you want to move. If things don't feel good while you're standing or walking, then you're not going to want to walk. The other part that plays into that goes along, we'll talk about it in a second, is the balance component for our people with Down syndrome that physical therapists will also be looking at. And since we're here, let's talk about balance. So balance is composed of 3 different areas: your eyes, your inner ears, that vestibular system, and what we call from the PT perspective, proprioception. So there are little sensors in all of your joints that tell your body where you are. And for people with Down syndrome, they have more than 50% prevalence of visual impairment, more than 50% prevalence of hearing impairment. And then with that ligamentous laxity, that increased flexibility that we were talking about, they're not getting the same information from their joints. So this sensory and balance issue is huge for our people, and physical therapists will be looking at that. But it also plays into how you're walking, because if you're balanced, you're not getting good information from your body about your balance, and your feet are in that flat foot position, making it harder to walk. It's very challenging. It takes a lot of effort to stand and walk. And I don't know about you, but when things are really hard and take a lot of effort, sometimes I just want to sit down and relax. So that's why it's so important. So those are 2 huge areas that physical therapists focus on: ligamentous laxity as the underlying, foot posture, foot support and flat feet, balance and sensory impairments going on. And then the other 2 that I would say are hugely important are hip stability and scoliosis. So hip stability, because our people, again, with that underlying ligamentous laxity, that increased flexibility, if you think about your person with Down syndrome and how they move and how they get up and down off the floor and how they can put their feet over their head and behind their head, or put their feet right up on the table while they're still standing, that's their hips moving with a lot more flexibility than the general population. So with that increased flexibility comes more wear and tear over time. So it's very important, especially when we're looking at our teens and our young adults, that we're watching carefully, that we're providing good hip stabilization and making sure they have good hip integrity.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing that I think physical therapists should really be looking at for teens and adults with Down syndrome is spinal alignment. So looking at how their back lines up. Again, because of that ligamentous laxity, you guys are going to be like, yes, Sarah, we hear you. It really plays a huge part in how the spine lines up, and it affects your sitting posture. It affects your standing posture. It affects everything. And so it's very, very common, again, for our teens and adults with Down syndrome to have increased curve through their spine, to have some bit of scoliosis that's going to affect how they stand. And just like we've talked about, this usually comes together. It's not usually just one thing at a time. So when we're looking at how your feet feel, how your hips feel, how your back feels, and looking at your balance and all those systems, it plays a huge part into how you move and how you want to move. And from that perspective, physio, PT, exercise, and movement are so important to help our people keep moving.
I'm really curious, particularly around scoliosis. Well, actually, I'm interested in all of them.
Me too.
Where to go first? I think Hannah's going to come back around to those, so we'll leave that for her. But I was curious: is there an age that's like too early to start? I know you typically work with teens, but is there an age that's too young? When do little ones start coming?
So we start at discharge from the NICU.
Okay.
So everything that we do is built on an interlinked philosophy of approach. So for us, our Mann method PT principles guide us through from birth through adulthood. And so our principles that we've developed and that we write about and share extend all the way through. So when we're looking at babies coming out of the NICU and learning how to get moving. So our babies are usually little. They're extremely bendy because they're very flexible from the ligamentous laxity. Yes, you guessed it. They're very flexible. And it takes a lot of planning for them to learn how to move their body for both stability and mobility, so that they're learning how to turn, how to roll, how to prop, how to reach, how to sit, how to crawl, how to stand. So we start with that from the get-go. Discharge from NICU, we have some gentle things to make babies and parents feel successful, because that can be really overwhelming. And so Dr. Jen, our pediatric physical therapist, is truly gifted in making movement fun and purposeful for our little ones, but also giving parents the tools to feel successful with what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So we start early. And that's really what the Down Syndrome Medical Interest Group recommends. Discharge from the NICU, time to go see a PT and get started on a plan to help your baby feel and you feel successful for movement and lay the foundation for it. Then over time, here in the States, we have early intervention that will come to your house until age 3. Mm-hmm. So it's working with your baby and your toddler really through those first few years, because there's a lot happening during that time. And so the early intervention physios, the specialists like us, we love working with the little ones so that you're building those skills so that they can participate in things with their siblings and their schoolmates, because we want our people to keep participating and sharing their lives with all their friends and family. So that goes all through the early years. And then it's time to transition to school. And we encourage that you're still participating in PT through school, because what you're focusing on are still those same principles that we're looking at. We're looking at general strength, hip stability, it's huge. We're looking at balance and vestibular input. We're looking at cardiovascular endurance, because when things are harder to move, when it feels harder, It can be harder to be motivated to move and challenging to build that endurance. And from the younger ages, we're looking at those mobility skills, crawling, walking, running, up and down the stairs, riding a bike. We're also looking at, as we get into the teen and adult years, those muscle asymmetries, because when you're held in those positions where your feet are turned out and your toes are getting tight, your calves are getting tight, and your hips are getting tight, and your back has a little bit of curve, then we need to focus on making sure that we're addressing that appropriately so that your body is supported by your muscles. Mm-hmm. So really, out of the NICU and on forever.
And over to see Sarah. Hina, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah. So okay. I love that you kind of touched on a few of the things already, Sarah, but I was wondering if we could do a little bit more of a deep dive into some of those specific traits that you talked about. So let's talk about tone first. And I think that is low tone is something that's very used so often when describing, the physical functioning of somebody with Down syndrome. So for our listeners that may not be aware of what tone is, would you mind describing what tone is and how low tone can impact? Because you talked about hyperflexibility and hypermobile joints, but how does low tone play into the picture?
You bet. So tone, muscle tone, is the alertness of your muscles at rest. So if you think you're just sitting right now and you're listening to this awesome podcast, how energetic do you feel? Like if you got startled, if you needed to stand up, is your body ready to move? That's tone. Are your muscles ready to move? For our people with Down syndrome, 100% of our people are born with hypotonia or low muscle tone. And it's on a large scale. It's a scale of how much tone is reflected, how low is the tone. Mm-hmm. But for oftentimes in the old school ways, people would say for our babies, they're very fluffy because they're so relaxed. So if you think of how relaxed you could possibly be, just like a noodle, just resting, that is that low muscle tone where your muscle is very relaxed and it takes a lot more effort to get it energized to move. Mm-hmm. So when you think about low muscle tone coupled with that ligamentous laxity and hyperflexibility, you can think of a person with Down syndrome across the lifespan that they have more range of motion. They can really bend in a lot of different directions. And because of that low muscle tone, it's harder to stabilize or harder to move into those neutral positions, mm-hmm. to get your knees together, to get your feet straight. When you're a baby, to bring your hands together takes a lot of work. Mm-hmm. To sit up straight when you're learning to sit. This is a lot of challenge of that combination of the ligamentous laxity and the low muscle tone for movement. Mm-hmm. And with that in mind, it affects not only movement, but it affects riding, it affects walking, it affects all the things that you want to do. So that's tone in a nutshell. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But what's important to remember, that tone is your muscles at rest. It's how alert your muscles are. Tone does not mean strength. And our people with Down syndrome can be very strong. They can build strength. They can build muscle. And it's very important to not be discouraged that low tone means low strength. That is not the case.
Yeah. I'm so happy that you made that distinction because there are two separate concepts that work independently. I have so many families or caregivers that always ask me, can tone improve over time? Can we, we'll get a little bit into some of the interventions as physios that you guys use, but overall in a lifespan, especially now that you work with teenagers and adults, what is the trajectory of tone? Is that something that can be improved?
Absolutely. I don't think I would say that tone improves. I would say it changes. Mm-hmm. Because we're not actively working on someone's tone. That's mm-hmm. how they're built. But it does change over a lifetime. So babies and little ones generally have more hypotonia. They have that lower tone. They're more relaxed. They are more bendy. They move just very gently.
Yeah.
Over time, when they're working and building their strength, every time a baby and a child is doing a new skill, every time they're working another day of practicing sitting up tall or rolling and reaching or laying on their tummy or going sit to stand, they're working their strength. And so that strength builds and it's going to change their strength over time. Now, here's something tricky that happens through teens and adults. As people build their strength, but also as they build their preferences in how they move, just like you and I, they may get more muscle tightness. So if they have a preference to stand with their feet out, their hips out, and their feet flat, those calf muscles start to tighten and shorten and really bulk up. Those hip flexor muscles, those muscles that runners are always talking about. For our teens and adults with Down syndrome who have that hip turnout and a more relaxed abdominal position, those hip flexors tighten. So it's interesting that you start to see muscle tightness through our teens and adults. Again, it's not tone. They can stretch, they can move, but they get a change in muscle length. So over the lifespan, tone changes because strength changes and mobility changes and positions changes. So a child who's born and is very bendy and very relaxed with that low muscle tone when they're little, as a teenager, may be an outstanding athlete and swimmer with looking very strong and amazing and moving very well. Still may have some relaxed muscle tone at rest, but very good functional strength. Then for our adults,
No, go ahead.
For our adults, especially later in years, looking at their 50s and 60s, it's different again. Because for our adults who are in their 50s and 60s, things start to change quite a bit. And the motivation to move may not be the same. So you actually see people getting even a little bit tighter. And again, having those tighter muscles and going back to that lower muscle tone. So it's kind of like a little curve over the lifespan that's interesting.
And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, that's generally what happens with everybody, right? Like as we all get older, our tone will change or our muscles will get tighter because that's just the way the body works. I was just thinking as you were talking about how like you can become stronger and all that, I just had Chris Nikic. I'm sure you're familiar with Chris, who's a wonderful adult with Down syndrome, who's a triathlete. Or no, Ironman. Sorry, I think he's done Ironman. So he's a great example of how training and building that strength. But even for someone like Chris, his tone could be low at rest. But, at a certain point, he's still very, very strong.
Yes, exactly. It's just that that same combination. Exactly.
Fantastic. And it's really great to kind of have, thank you for providing that little long-term look at what it can look like and how we can support that is something we'll talk about in a minute. But you talked about hypermobile joints.
Oh, yes.
watching our students and loved ones with Down syndrome do yoga, it is just fascinating, and to the positions that they can get themselves into, even when they're younger. I've had some of my kids that'll sit on the chair, but their feet are in all sorts of different positions. So part of it is kind of cool that they're so flexible, but there's a slight challenge that comes with hypermobile joints. And you alluded to it a bit earlier, but can you just talk a little bit about during everyday functional activities, like when you're sitting at a desk at school, or, you're doing things throughout your day, how does that increased flexibility make it harder to sustain those postures?
Absolutely. And I think hyper flexible joints, I think it's a crux of so much for our people with Down syndrome, especially I can't imagine the challenge of sitting in a classroom, paying attention to whatever your teacher is saying when you're using all of your attention to keep your body strong so that your feet are on the ground, your knees are together, your trunk is up, and you're not just relaxing into your chair. It's such a big deal for our people. So like I mentioned earlier, the ligamentous laxity is huge. And ligamentous laxity, that hyperflexibility of joints, it affects every joint in the body of our people with Down syndrome, from head to toe. Every single joint is bendier. So when you think about that, think about sitting in a chair when you need to be paying attention at school as a little kid, where you already maybe want to be playing at recess, but you're really trying to pay attention to your teacher who's teaching you math. And for our people, they're generally smaller in stature.
Mm-hmm.
So the chair might be too high. And so maybe your feet don't touch the ground. So you're going to scoot back into the chair and you're going to lean back. And because you have that flexibility in your hips and your back, you can just relax into a rounded posture. And then you need your balance because your feet are dangling. So you're probably going to move into this crisscross applesauce position on your chair while you're slouching. But now the teacher's still talking about division and you're kind of still wishing you were at recess. And now you can fold over all the way, but keep your chin up. So now we're stretching our neck, we're stretching our back, those hips are turned out, and we've got all of this mobility that we have just sitting in a chair while we're trying to listen. And that's not an active learning position. It's hard when your body, when we couple that flexibility with the low tone, that moves you into, it's hard to stay in an upright learning posture. And it's hard to pay attention when you're in a folded over, totally relaxed posture. So it's a huge challenge for hyperflexibility and the low tone coupled together. Nancy Gianni from Gigi's Playhouse always brings up the example of, imagine if you're wearing an oven mitt. So a mitt that you put on your hand to get hot things out of the oven. Imagine that, that's how it feels, that your hands feel very flexible and relaxed with that low muscle tone. And now you're going to try and write your name and do your work. Plus you're trying to keep your back supported. Plus you're trying to keep your hips supported. And then, like Marla would say, like, now we also have to think about speech production and supporting upright, that someone's going to ask us a question about something while we're crumpled in, not being able to support that diaphragm and good breath support. And it's hard. It plays a huge role in the challenges in the classroom, in the work environment, and in general in the community and at home.
Yeah.
So that's why we're so passionate about building that strength to support that hypermobility so that you can pay attention better.
Yeah. I would say our students, they do the best that they can. And I often see students, especially with poor seating, they can manage it for 5 to 10 minutes. And then they're laying, we hear a lot about, the students laying on the floor, or they're laying on the wall, or, leaning over, flopping over. Well, there's reasons for all of that. And the reasons are what you've just described. And it's not always like naughtiness per se, as much as exhaustion.
Right. And a lot of times, and it's always walking that line to find behind the behavioral plan, because sometimes it is. You're like,
sometimes it's naughty.
I'd rather go over here and do something else. But really, oftentimes for our people, from little kids to grown adults, we really, if we pay attention to how they're moving and how to help them move better, be stronger, and participate in activities in a supported way, like a actually physically supported way, when it comes to how your desk is set up, how your chair is set up, it can make a huge difference in their ability to participate in all facets of life.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think it's so important to think about how, from an environmental perspective, so the chair that they sit in or whatever activity that they're doing, how we can support them so that their bodies can then focus on the learning piece. Because I know as OTs, we're constantly, like, the first thing I always think about when I go for a school observation is, what are they sitting on? Are their feet supported, right? Because otherwise then your body is doing the work of something that a chair could help you with, and then you can actually focus. So it's kind of really understanding the person and their environment and how you can, build a system that helps them learn and not focus solely on just keeping themselves upright and not being able to do anything else.
Absolutely. I mean, if your attention is divided, just trying to stay upright,
Yeah.
and get enough air so that you can answer a question,
Yeah.
it's going to make it really hard to focus on the learning. So absolutely.
Yeah.
Same page.
Same page. Perfect. I know that I have families asking about things. So kind of moving on to balance and coordination, because you referred to it a bit earlier as well. I have families asking about stairs all the time. So our guys, for a few reasons, have a tough time on stairs sometimes, whether it's depth perception, understanding the motor planning. Can you talk a little bit about balance and coordination from like using stairs as an example of learning how to go up and down stairs?
Absolutely. And it's such a good example. And it's something that affects our people, particularly across the lifespan, when they're little, in their middle years, and also when they're older.
Mm-hmm.
And so first off, if you guys take nothing else from our time together, I would say, remember this. Let's make sure people are wearing good shoes, because it really does come down, for me, as one of the easiest things we can do is make sure people are wearing good shoes and they can feel their feet.
Yeah.
So that's a huge part of anything. So most important for me is wear good shoes, because when you're walking up the stairs, you're really asking a lot of your body. You're asking for stability, so you know where your feet are. You're asking for lateral weight shift. That means going side to side. You're asking for someone to go into single leg balance, balancing on one foot. Oh, geez. Okay, we're going to go into single leg balance, even for a little bit. Then you're asking for increased leg and hip strength as we go up, pushing up. So already we're at like 3 things before we even started going up. Then you're asking for someone to be able to see where they're going and understand that it's a step and perceive that depth perception, just like you said, and we're asking a lot of all of the systems that are already, we know, are impacted for our people with Down syndrome. So from that perspective, balance and coordination is a huge, huge focus for us, and not just focusing on static balance. Like, it's always hard, and we all get frustrated when we're always doing a one leg balance test and our kids don't test well. Like, yeah, it's really hard to balance on one foot. But my question is, like, why do we want to balance on one foot? I would like you to be able to shift your weight and balance on one foot, and then switch and balance, just short bouts. So from a physio perspective, it's super important to us that from an early age, number 1, good foot support. And number 2, we're working on a lateral weight shift. So from an intervention perspective, I'm sure you've seen the little kids sitting on the balls, going side to side with the physio behind them. That's wonderful, because it's giving them that input to their vestibular system and helping them track with their eyes to get that weight shift side to side. But what I would say is that a part that often we skip as physios is we move from the ball, and then now can you go up the stairs?
Yeah.
Well, we've skipped a few things there. And so what Dr. Jen, our beautiful, wonderful pediatric PT, has really integrated for us is lateral weight shift in standing, so that we're working on that weight shift side to side with single leg balance, loading the foot, the knee, and the hip at the same time, getting your trunk to move with abdominal activation and visual tracking. So working that side to side balance while you're looking ahead is a huge part of stairs.
Yeah.
We also, again, like to work the strength component of it too. So you're practicing the stairs, practicing going up, practicing going down on just a small step.
Yeah.
So you're just stepping up and down 1 foot at a time, so that you can build the strength and build the balance and work on the visual tracking and wear good shoes to achieve that movement up.
To get that. Yeah. And I like that you mentioned that it doesn't have to be straight from the therapy ball to the stairs, because there's lots of foundational and little pieces that build on each other to work on independently first, and then you can generalize it to the stairs, because all that stuff needs to be worked on beforehand. So
yes,
that's super helpful.
And it's all foundations, like you're building on things. So for little ones, and if we look at Pat Winder's work too, it's foundations that we're building that sit to stand. We're doing squats. Our
Yeah.
babies are doing squats. They're working and getting that hip strength and that leg strength
Yeah.
to get the strength. And then really where Dr. Jen's focus is to get the weight shift and the visual focus, and then to start practicing it all together, moving on up. So it's really important. And then always, like, our goal always is that things feel successful and that people are winning. Dr. Jen is the queen of singing. So there are many singing songs that are paired with her stairs. But there's lots of singing about going up the stairs, because that, like Marla, like you would say from a speech perspective, that music and rhythm it taps into a different part of how motor is controlled, which is awesome. And so with hand support on the rails, with hand support with your parents, with decreasing hand support and decreasing levels, moving with that step together pattern, followed by our big steps up, it's a beautiful progression that, most important, I think, if you're making it successful for your child, your adult, that everyone feels like they're doing a good job, then we start making progress. And that's awesome.
That's critical. Yeah.
Fantastic. And then kind of last little thing in this section, I wanted to talk about core stability. So I know, like, it's so important. Our stability kind of, what we call it, like from proximal to distal, right? So it starts kind of right at their core. If that's strong, then it can support the rest of our body, including our arms. And like from an OT perspective, we focus on that quite a bit, where we're trying to get the core stabilized and strengthened so that they can do all the fine motor work with their shoulders, arms, hands, fingers, etc. What from a PT perspective, what are we doing to make sure that the core is stronger, and how does that kind of fit into the whole picture of
I'm so glad you asked, because we consider the core a little bit more from a physio perspective. So it's not just your abs and the front part of your muscles, but it's your glutes and your hips. And I will tell you, all of my documentation focuses so much on abdominal and gluteal co-activation. So are you getting your booty muscles and your belly muscles to work together? Because, as we mentioned, there's some hypermobility and ligamentous laxity, especially through your hips and through all the joints of your back. So when you're thinking about that, when that's that core through your hips and through your back, that everything is more flexible, the stronger that you can be through those joints and through those muscles, the better it will be for sitting, standing, walking, and moving. So we love to focus on exercises that give you bang for your buck, that you're getting those abdominal muscles, those tummy muscles working, as well as your gluteals or those bottom booty muscles. So if you think about it, when our little babies are doing crawling or hands and knees, our most favorite position when they're up in tall kneeling, when they're on their knees, working up on playing with toys on the counter, amazing, because they're working their hips and their core muscles at the same time. We carry that on for our teens and adults. And it plays a huge role when we're talking about, why do we do squats? Why do we do push-ups and planks and bridges where you lift your bottom up and down? Why do we work on jumps? Because you're getting muscle activation of those tummy muscles and those hip muscles at the same time. It creates strength and stability at the joints that control that proximal part of your body and allow you to do all the other things that you want to do in life. So it's huge when we think about core and hip together.
And I think like core strength and stability impact your balance. They impact your coordination. It just like basically impacts everything. So it's such a great place to focus and to start in terms of building strength and function, right? So it's just, I'm so happy that you kind of reiterated that fact that it's a good area to focus on for sure.
Yep. And I would just say, be a little more broad than just the core. Make sure you're including the booty and the hips.
Yes.
Because
absolutely.
it's a little more. Full circle, all the way around.
Core plus booty for sure. Yes. Abs and butt.
That's right. Yes.
What about pelvic floor stability? I know from an OT perspective, we talk a little bit about how the diaphragm and the pelvic floor work together for toileting. So, just kind of like how, but from your perspective, what is the pelvic floor stability like for our loved ones with Down syndrome, and kind of where are some of the challenges that lie for them with that?
So this is a huge issue that a lot of people don't talk about. And I am by no means an expert in pelvic floor, but my friend, Helen Milligan from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, is amazing. And she works with individuals with Down syndrome from a pelvic floor therapy perspective. So my little bit of knowledge that I can share from this is all from our PT, Helen Milligan, at SHOP, because it's not my specialty. But what I know from hanging out with her a lot is, again, if we focus on thinking about that low resting muscle tone, that applies not just to our skeletal muscle, but to the muscles throughout our body, through our veins, through the pelvic floor, all the different muscle in your body is that for people with Down syndrome has a lower resting muscle tone, which means when you're toileting, when you're going to the restroom, that it's more challenging to have natural tone that's going to just end the stream of urine. It's just harder, or end the stream when you're going to the bathroom. It's going to be harder because that tone is lower. When you couple that with the fact that the motility, so we're thinking about that GI muscles for our people, move slower. So they have, for our teens and adults, there's more constipation. It's slower to process the materials going through. So there's oftentimes more strain. So now we've got low resting muscle tone through that pelvic floor, as well as strain relative to the constipation, maybe even prolonged sitting. So now you're in a longer position, which again, is hard to be in those positions on a toilet. It's very challenging from a whole series of issues that are there with toileting. So it plays a huge role. And I think if you're noticing for little ones with the toileting, there's a lot of strategies to use. Like Dr. Lena Patel has amazing strategies for toileting. And she's our go-to on like potty training and toileting strategies and how to potty train. But, and that's not just like a little kid thing. It's like on and on. It's an evolving skill. Yeah. So learning how to potty train or how to toilet. But when we're looking at it from that pelvic floor, there's a lot of things that are very challenging. And it's really hard for anyone with or without Down syndrome to really tune in to those pelvic floor muscles and feel that you're tightening or relaxing or closed. It's really a challenge. And so, having a specialist that you can reach out to, or looking into the research for pelvic floor therapy, if that is something that's affecting your family, and especially for older adults, because it's going to be another thing that comes back, then it is very worthwhile to focus on that pelvic floor strengthening. But it's a very nuanced field, and it's very challenging. Like it's challenging for anyone, but I would say particularly for people with Down syndrome because of that natural lower tone as well.
The lower tone and then the poor proprioception does not help matters either, right? So if you're not able to sense what your muscles are doing, it's very hard to understand the idea of push and relax because of that low proprioception. So
yes. And then we couple in just relative to, since we're talking toileting, this is what our OT, Jamie McGrew, I love OTs because you guys are so practical. They're such pragmatic skills. But when you think about those shorter arms relative to trunk length, when you're toileting, now we've got poor proprioception. We've been in longer prolonged positions. We've got decreased muscle tone, and now you have shorter arms, and you're in charge of wiping. And that is a huge challenge for so many people. Again, not just little kids, but for adults. And I encourage, like, if you're a person with Down syndrome is struggling with toileting, is struggling with wiping, reach out to your OTs, reach out to your PTs for assistance with that, because it's real. It's not just a Down syndrome thing. Yeah. It's real and very common.
Yeah. Kind of where toileting often stalls for a lot of our teens. It's like they've gotten everything. Wiping is that last little thing that's just, and their body is working against them, especially with the shortened arms, right? So it's just like, okay, really have to kind of come up with
Okay.
Yeah.
I gotta share some Miss Jamie tips and tricks because we seriously talk about wiping all
Fantastic.
the time.
Let's do it.
And it's so good. And I think this is so important for so many people. So here's what we've been doing. First off, you can order fake bottoms from Amazon, which I love because then you can have it in front of you to see what it looks like and to get that shape when you're wiping. Then we can put it up behind you so you can practice with your OT as well, which is nice. But what Miss Jamie has also done is we've gotten reflective mirrors that are stick-on that go on the back of the toilet seat. So again, now when you're looking, you can have a better view so that you can use some of those visual skills instead of that. And I love just having that practice so that you can, and as Miss Jamie always says, she goes, wipe till it's clean.
Yeah.
As many as it takes. And we use wipes. We always like to have wipes or dude wipes because the dude wipes are a little bigger and smell more manly. We've got their dude wipes. They're cool. But wipe till it's clean and throw it in the toilet. And I think that's great. And I just love that she's encouraging that we're putting those mirrors back there on the toilet seat so you can see a little bit more like what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because it is really, really hard.
Well, I think you mentioned that, it's like you're training your muscle to do it, right? So I think for us, for everybody else, like wiping just comes so easily because we just, but like it's something that can be taught, but it's like any kind of exercise where you have to keep practicing to get your body used to it, your hips to be able to rotate, so to be able to do all those things. So it can be done, but it's just one of those things where you have to train to do it. It's like training for an event. You need to practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So,
And if you think how our people are built, with that increased flexibility through their joints, the decreased balance, the shorter limb length compared to their trunk, maybe wider hips. So now it's like, which way do you go for the wipe? Do you go under or around? There's a lot of things that are really, truly challenging
for sure
for everybody.
And then their balance, the balance is hard too, right? Wouldn't you say?
The
Because
balance is huge.
They're afraid they're going to fall off the toilet. So it's hard for them to move around to wipe because they're just are not secure enough on the seat. So
yes, I'm so grateful for toilets that are in front of a counter so that you can lean forward and grab the counter.
100%.
Oh, thank goodness. Good thinking, guys.
Great. I love that. Thank you so much for kind of doing that deep dive into some of those components, because I think it's really important for our listeners to understand how all of that works together and how each component is so important for that overall physical functioning, with respect to, for our people with Down syndrome. So
And I think just to know that it's not just you and it's not just your family and it's not just your person. It's a real thing for so many.
Yeah, definitely.
Hina, should we move to exercise?
Yeah, go for it. Yes, let's do that.
So I would love to hear your thoughts on exercise and consistency of exercise and what well-programmed exercise can do to really benefit people with Down syndrome for all of the things that we've just discussed previously.
Excellent. I love to talk about exercise. So I would say for all people, truly for all people, but especially for our people with Down syndrome, the most important thing is being successful with what your exercise is. So if it feels like you're doing it right and you're doing a good job and you feel good about it, that's something that you'll continue with. So number one is success. Do you feel like you're doing it? And it's not too hard. That's the thing that PTs and physios love, to progress stuff and make things extra complicated and sneaky. Like, here's a new thing. And that's super frustrating and people won't do it. I spent 5 years of my early PT career doing that until families were like, I'm not going to do that, Sarah. We will not do that. Oh, what if I give you these 3 things that are successful and purposeful that will do that? Oh, let's do that. That's better. So success is really important. Then routine. So as almost everyone with Down syndrome, I will generalize, are generally routine-oriented people, which I love because I am a routine person. I like the same. I like to know what I'm supposed to do. I like to check it off with my chart. And then I like to go on to my next thing. So if we make it successful and routine based and consistent. Number 3, I say, all right, our people with Down syndrome have a very special skill as visual learners. People with Down syndrome are phenomenal visual learners. They're amazing at imitation. They're amazing at remembering movies. The visual is outstanding when they learn things and then practice. That visual is amazing. The auditory processing is often harder for our people with Down syndrome. So the more you talk and the more you tell them, the harder something gets. So we rely on visual charts. So if I'm sending my patients and my friends home, I'm going to send them home with a chart that has pictures and the words we say and a place to check it off. So success, routine, and then being purposeful. So I always say, if you are doing any exercise and you're doing it consistently, that's better than nothing. Great, you're doing it. So that's awesome. But for me, I always want to make it extra purposeful. So again, when we're thinking back to our people with Down syndrome and how they're built, going back to that very beginning of physiology, with their flat foot posture, their increased ligamentous laxity, their higher prevalence of hip issues, of scoliosis, that low muscle tone, that hyperflexibility, I want to be very purposeful in the exercises that we're doing so that we're targeting something. If I'm going to commit to doing my exercise, well, I hope it's really doing something for me. So I like we talked about earlier, Hannah, with the core, I want to make sure that any exercise we're doing is working that core and the booty, that we're getting that abdominal and gluteal activation. I want to make sure it's functional so that we're building strength that we can use for stairs, that we can use for getting up and down out of the car, that we can use for getting up and down out of the floor. I want to make sure that it's working on transfers so that we're getting up and down from the floor. I want to sneak all of these things in to make it purposeful. And I want to work on balance because that balance is going to play a huge part in our weight shift and how your body reacts to balance challenges. So from an exercise perspective, it's going to be unique for everybody, but we do have a pretty consistent approach. Again, focusing on success. The most important thing is that I want people to go home and do the exercises and feel good about it and do them every day and check them off on their visual chart and bring it back to me. And that's what happens for my friends and at our practice. I have to say, we have beautiful adherence to the home program because it's what we do. We practice it in PT. People feel good about it. They know what to do. They know the words to say to do it. And they have a chart that tells them what to do to go home. So our top 3 exercises for teens and adults, when it comes down to it, you may have heard me mention squats a few times because I love them. But squats are a huge functional exercise. So when you think about doing a squat, just sitting down and standing up and sitting down, your feet are flat on the floor. So we're starting with those feet in a neutral position, which is huge for our people. Knees are in, they're pointing straight forward, and you're going to stand up. So you've used your foot position, your knees in a neutral position, you've used your leg strength, you've used your hip strength. We like to do our squats with our arms out in front. So now you're using your shoulders and your back muscles, and you stand up, and now we're using that core because your abdominals are tight and your back is working. Plus, you're looking forward. So we're working on that visual coordination for balance. So yes, we're doing a squat because they're good for you. But really, we're working all the way down from feet up to visual coordination and everything in between. It's going to build strength, especially through the abdominals, through the hips, and through the legs, which is going to make it easier for strength, for transfers, for up and down, for getting in and out of the car, for walking, and for stairs. So squats are a huge, huge activity for us because it's so purposeful. And for teens and adults, it's also age appropriate. So you're doing squats. It's fun to sit on the exercise ball and rock side to side like a sweet little 2-year-old. But you're a teenager, you're an adult. We want to be, if you're at the rec center, if you're at the gym, I want to make sure you have exercises that are comparable to your peers. Then our number 2 exercise is Dr. Jen's favorite. And we do this across the lifespan. And it is so huge and so important, that lateral weight shift. So we're standing up with our feet apart and shifting your weight side to side, where you lift one foot off the ground. So it's like you're rocking. When we're sending them home with parents for little kids, we call them our penguin waddles, because you look like a penguin lifting side to side. Your legs are straight, your toes are up, and you lift one foot and the other. It's not a big kick. It's just a little waddle. When it's for our teenagers and adults, we call them our lateral tilts, because we're teenagers and adults. We don't do penguin waddles, but sometimes we sing the song. It just happens. But again, you're working in that tall, strong posture with a side to side weight shift, lifting one foot off the ground just a tiny bit, side to side with that repetition. And then we'll build in some holds side to side. So you get that little 1 foot balance just for 2 seconds that you need for stairs. Now you're thinking, are we just doing this for fun because it's fun to be like a penguin? No, we're working on that proprioception through your feet, side to side. We're working on leg strength because you're keeping your legs straight. We're working on glute med strength, which is that outside muscle on your bottom that helps when you're walking. It keeps you from falling down.
Yeah.
So really working that lateral hip strength. We do our side to side tilts with our arms out to the side. So now we've got those scapular muscles engaged, our abdominal muscles, and a forward gaze working that vision. So you're working weight shift, hip strength, visual coordination, and making it very functional. So squats and then lateral tilts. And then one of my favorite and most successful exercises is the gluteal bridge, which babies do on their own. They're laying on their back and they've got to lift their bottom up to help with diaper changes. This is huge. You're on your back, laying down, knees are bent, and your bottom lifts up. When you do that, you're engaging your abdominal muscles and your gluteal muscles, that core, booty and belly, and lifting up. So you're creating more stability through the hip and through the low back and through the core, which just is a beautiful strengthener. Mm-hmm. It's also really nice because most people are really successful at the bridge because it's just a one joint movement. Mm-hmm. And you get a lot of support and a lot of body feedback because you're on the floor. Mm-hmm. What I love is I have people lay down on the floor and put their hands behind their head so their elbows are out wide. We're opening up that chest, getting a nice stretch through the front of the chest. The back is supported because we know for our people, scoliosis is a big deal. So we want to have that opening through the front and support through the back. Knees are bent and supported. Feet are flat, getting more proprioception through the feet. And we help feel those gluteal muscles. You can use your hands to support our person as they lift their gluteal muscles, lift that bottom up and feel those muscles turn on at the core and the glutes. And now you're doing strengthening and it's super successful. So those are my top 3 exercises. Our
awesome.
Squats, our side to side tilts or penguin waddles, and our gluteal bridges. And what's also nice is they're body weight exercises. They require no space and you really can't overdose on them. Mm-hmm. You could do them every day and it's going to be safe and effective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think those are awesome. 3. Yeah.
They're so fun.
That's a great list. Uh-huh. And I kind of want to hear the songs later. You might have to sing them for us after we've got.
I'm not as good as Dr. Jen with the penguin song, but I will happily do it because it sticks in your head. It sets the tempo for it.
Yeah.
And it makes a huge difference because that repetition. So that's the other thing for our people when it comes to exercise. Learning a new skill is a challenge. It's a challenge for all of us. But because of the low tone, because of the hypermobility, because of that cognitive sequencing and learning process, it's harder for our people to learn and master a new skill. I once read an article that said it takes 52 times for our people with Down syndrome to learn something new. That's a lot of exposure. Mm-hmm. And as opposed to that, it takes 21 days to make a habit. More. Maybe much more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so when you make it successful for our people and give them the words that are the cues for the body setup and help them have a song or a little trigger for their mind that helps make it successful, then people do it and then it's theirs. And you're not arguing with your mom that you need to do your exercises for PT. You're not arguing with anyone. You're not feeling like it's too hard. You're like, I know the words. I can do this.
Well, and music is the foundation for exercise for all kinds of things that are not anything to do with Down syndrome in particular. You go to any Zumba class or any whatever cardio class, they're going to put it to music so that you know when the thing is done, right? If you're doing this really hard thing, you're like, oh my God, when is this going to be over? Well, it's at the end of the song, right? That's when you switch over.
And it'll be done.
It's beneficial, right? It's not going to last forever. It's for the length of the Penguin song, which I will be hearing later for sure.
Which is awesome too for babies. And it's so fun to watch Dr. Jen with the babies because even if they're not verbal yet, they know that we're going to do the Penguin song. And when Dr. Jen counts 1, 2, 3, we stop. We're done. On to the next activity.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yep.
Music is
really
so motivating too, right?
Absolutely.
So it's motivating, it's fun. And just like you said, Marla, it ends. There's an end.
I mean, anybody who's been mid-plank understands that feeling. Like, when are we done? Where is the end of this? Do you have any other resources that you'd really like to share with our listeners in closing that you think are great ones for people or in families of people with Down syndrome?
Absolutely. So we were lucky enough to partner with Gigi's Playhouse to design their Gigi Fit program. So everything that you see in Gigi Fit comes from Dr. Jen and me for our Mann Method PT approach. So it's a PT-based exercise class for individuals with Down syndrome across the lifespan. And what's been amazing with the pandemic is that they took it online. So it's Gigi's at home. And you've got resources now that you could, wherever you are in the world, you could access these classes.
Fun.
So first I'd say that go to Gigi's Playhouse online and you can do the Gigi's at home, the Gigi Fit classes, infant, toddler, school age, teen, adult, and we did a caregiver program for parents as well.
Great.
Has purposeful exercise for our people. So I think that's the first one that's like, yes, there you go. The Down Syndrome Medical Interest Group is an awesome resource because they have so many talented people. So I can't speak to great pelvic floor therapy and approach, but I know someone who can, and she's in that group. Let's talk to Helen Milligan about those things. So I think if you have questions about anything, there's someone in that group that is able to speak with that, which is amazing. And the Global Down Syndrome Foundation just published, which is a big deal to me, the adult Down syndrome guidelines, which is huge. So it came out this past year. It's an amazing collaboration of some of the best doctors and scientists in the world who are doing such good work for all of our people, who provide some good guidelines. And I'm excited when we'll do the updates that include the physical therapy in the future. But they're really, really good guidelines now. So I think those are some great places to start. You guys are obviously amazing because it's so, what I love is even more that it's pragmatic. You know, there's some great science out there, but for our families who have questions like, let's talk toileting. What do we do?
Yeah.
What do we do? Help me. I need an idea. I think that's what's so beautiful about your organization is that it's really accessible to families who have questions and need strategies. And so I think that is awesome. So way to go, guys.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, that is always our plan, is to have information that you can use, you know, today would be great. And it sounds a lot like your exercise programming, right? Which is like, you don't need things, you don't need special rooms, you can do it anywhere, anytime, and have a great outcome from it, which is fantastic.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, I learned this too from my families and from my errors doing this. Like, if you asked me 10 years ago, my exercise prescription was ridiculous and incredibly comprehensive. And I helped families sign up. I would get them gym memberships and sign them up at the rec center. And it was not at all doable. And then they didn't feel good because it was not successful. And I didn't feel good because it wasn't successful. And so I'm so grateful to my families for being patient with me and helping me find my path to say, what is something we can do that's going to be successful and purposeful and replicable with routine forever?
Yeah. Brilliant. Yep. I like it. I like it a lot.
Love it.
We so appreciate your time today. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. We love people who are as enthusiastic as we are about all things related to people with Down syndrome and how they can be happy and successful and have a great time in life. So what a joy to talk to you. Thanks so much for coming today.
Yes. Thank you so
all
much.
so much.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me. It's so fun.
Yeah.
So fun.
Thank you.
Wonderful.